In fact, just about the last trip that I did internationally was out to Melbourne. I went to a joint Monash Melbourne event. That was back in December 2019. So I'll share my screen, and I just want to check. Can you see this? Okay, great. I see a floating thumbs up. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the future of working from home. So as David mentioned, this is like a weird thing. I started working on this almost 20 years ago, and it was really not a big topic. I did some policy stuff. By far, the pinnacle of it was meeting the President Obama, who's fantastic. I'm a huge fan of him back in 2014. It kind of waxed and waned. And then obviously in March 2020, there was a huge surge of interest. I'm going to talk about today some survey work and some kind of very practical firm-based stuff. And then Peter's going to talk about another research project we have afterwards. So I'm going to draw mainly on today from we have surveys of 5,000 working age Americans, about 1,000 US firms. And then we have surveys of around 20,000 working age adults across 22 countries. The data I've seen for Australia looks pretty similar to the UK, to the US, to Canada. Happy to take questions on it, but most of the themes are going to be pretty global. I mean, earlier in the week, I was talking to some firms in Japan, and I spent much of my time talking to organizations. Like today, I was in Asana, spent much of the day, which is a high-tech firm, and then earlier, oddly enough, talking to some folks in Korea. So what do we know? So firstly, work from home is sticking. So here's data for the US, but again, Australia, UK, Canada, New Zealand going to look pretty similar. In fact, Peter has Australian data, and you'll see that on what he has. So this is US data, but you can take it as any kind of Anglo-Saxon advanced economy. So before the pandemic, it was about 5% of people were working from home. So this is this pre-COVID number. It jumped about 12-fold to around 60%, and then it slowly dropped back as the pandemic has progressed. What happened, of course, is in May 2020, everyone shifted to work from home. Anyone that could work from home did. And then as wave after wave of pandemics come and gone, it surged and dropped back. In some ways, the most interesting point is this. This is what people have said they're going to do post-pandemic. So again, we've been surveying 5,000 people a month. This is the most recent data. And they basically are saying post-pandemic, they're going to be working from home about 30% of days. So that's a huge increase. It's about 5-6-fold increase on post versus pre-pandemic. So what does that look like? It's worth noting that there are really three groups in society. There's a group that is important not to forget, which are frontline employees. They're mostly non-grads. They're typically lower paid. They're not going to get to work from home. And I've talked to companies, company after company. This group kind of feels like left out, upset, not unreasonably. I'm happy to discuss this in the Q&A, but it's definitely a management issue that just over half of folks aren't getting to work from home at all. The other half can be broken into two groups. There's hybrid, which is most people, probably pretty much everyone I'm suspecting listening, most of us. The academics will be classically in this group, for example, researchers. So we'll come in some days, work from home others. There's then a group which is fully work from home. That may shrink a bit, but that's a lot of specialized roles. That's IT support, payroll, contractors. Like at Stanford, we've just fully remoted a bunch of these roles. The view being like Melbourne, I mean, where we live is very expensive. In fact, I think Melbourne's gold rushers came right after Stanford's, apparently. So, sorry, California, some of the miners went right across, but they're both very expensive areas. And for us, it makes sense for some of these roles to be fully remote and be in other parts of the US where it's, there's relatively low wage rates. I'm going to talk about hybrid, mainly because it's the trickiest. It's all senior managers, most managers. And while it's 30% of the workforce, it's about 50% of payroll. So it's definitely a big issue. And it's the thing that when I talk to people, they're really struggling with. So why has hybrid become to dominate? And it has really dominated in the US. I'd be interested, as far as I know, it's been pretty dominant in Australia. I've certainly heard that from the UK, but happy to discuss it in Q&A. The advocates of hybrid, which would include myself, would be say, take the Apple plan. The Apple plan's come unraveled a bit recently, but they initially said 3 days in the office, and now looks like it's 2. But imagine, they're going to have 2 days in the office. It's Tuesday, Thursday. The idea is you come in for those 2 days. They're very social. Everyone's in together. All your meetings, presentations, training, client events are there. It's good for creativity, and it's good for culture and kind of building face-to-face connections. The other days, you then deliberately all work from home, which has the upside of being quiet. So I have a randomized control trial and some other evidence showing people are actually more productive per minute when they work from home on quiet work, because quiet work is better done in a quiet place, which is home. And the other issue is it saves on commute. So the average commute times, again, I'm guessing Australia looks very similar to the UK, US, New Zealand, Canada, etc. Typically, commute times in these countries across Europe actually is about an hour a day and a bit over, including time getting ready. So working from home saves people about 70 minutes a day, 60 minutes less commute, about 10 minutes less getting ready. Question is, where does that time go? About half of it goes into extra work, and the other half goes into more leisure, childcare, home improvements, etc. So the reason I focus on the extra work is for employers. They really care about this. The pitch to employers is, look, if folks work from home 3 days or 2 days a week, they're going to be better if they're doing quiet work at home to get that done. And the other benefit, one of the other benefits at least, is they're now going to effectively work a bit more. They won't work all of the saved time. They may work about half of it. So, they win and you win. As a result, when we survey people, or there's randomized control trial data or other experimental data, mostly people think well-organized hybrid, so a 3-2 or 2-3 plan that people come in on the same days, is going to improve productivity. There's a bit of debate about this, but I'd say the mean estimates are kind of low single digits. It's certainly, on average, people's view is it probably is not negative. It's probably not massively positive, but it's probably mildly positive. The big upside for work from home, I think, one of the major upsides, is employees really like it. So here's a survey we've done, again, from the US. We have almost 20,000 people. I've actually done this across countries, similar results. You ask people how they value hybrid work from home, say 2 or 3 days a week, versus come in the office full time. And you ask them in terms of positive, negative, zero, and do they give positive or negative in terms of pay, and we take the average here. The numbers here are about 8%. They're a bit higher in finance and tech, a bit lower in other industries. This actually matches very well with some randomized control trial data from pre-pandemic, actually, when people evaluated different jobs and whether you could work from home or not. I have a randomized control trial just wrapping up in China, where we randomized 1,600 people in a tech and finance firm. And there we didn't look at amenities, we looked at quit rates, and people that are randomized into working from home 2 days a week, their quit rates dropped by a third, which is like an enormous effect. So it's very clear that most employees want to work from home 2-3 days a week. If you let them do something like that, they're a lot happier. Their quit rates drop. It's easier to hire people. And in fact, if you ask people, why is that? The key benefit, maybe pretty obviously, is no commute. You save a lot of time. The second benefit is less obvious, but it's something that's come out during the pandemic, which is flexible work schedule. So when I talk to companies that organize hybrid well, the idea is you're in the office, let's say, 3 days a week, and you're having all your group meetings, presentations, mentoring. Then the 2 days a week you're at home is individual quiet time, reading, writing, data work. That's the kind of thing, if you need to go to the dentist or pick your kids up from school, or maybe, you want to go play tennis and the courts are free on a Thursday morning, you can do it and make it up later. And so this is the sense of the flexibility. A lot of people like the ability to work from home, so it lets them flex. And there are some things that are a lot easier to do in the middle of a working week, like, go see the dentist. Another angle, so if I go through them, there are 4 reasons people like hybrid. One is it makes employees happy. 2, it potentially increases productivity. 3, it may save space. I'll come back to this later. It's not clear it would do much in the short run. In the long run, it will. The 4th reason is it appears to be important for supporting diversity. So what we see in our data and what other people see in the data is, for individuals that are diverse, kind of in the minority in the workplace, in fact, by multiple dimensions, by age, by race, by gender, by politics, and by religion, they feel slightly less comfortable coming in every day. I mean, you can kind of see why, and there's lots of evidence discussing things like microaggressions and slights, etc., and discrimination. This group reports in our survey data and other surveys that they are more keen on work from home, not massively, but the average days, for example, black versus white employees in the US report they want to work from home is 2.6 versus 2.1. And this is important because if you're a firm that's, say, not going to allow work from home, you have to be aware that the group that's most likely to leave fastest are going to be diversity or DEI employees, and that's exactly the same group you're particularly keen on keeping. And so DEI, supporting DEI has turned out to be another important reason for promoting hybrid work from home. So given everything I've said, not surprisingly, employers are increasingly shifting to hybrid. Here's what people have told us month by month they're planning to do post-pandemic. It's just up and up and up. It's kind of flatlining out, but I think it's going to flatline out for managers and employees, typically 2 to 3 days a week at home. So the big challenge is not whether to do this. Like pretty much everyone I speak to is on board. It's how to execute. And there are 2 questions I get asked: how many days and which days? How many days is kind of how many days do you need to be in the office for face-to-face work and meetings and presentations? It's kind of like the Autor-Levy-Murnane task-based model of what we do. Figure out the tasks that are best done together, work out the total amount of time that takes. If that's 3 days, then you probably want to be in the office 3 days a week. The big issue is then how to organize it. So a lot of people want to choose their work from home days. Seems very natural. Everyone likes choice. So we asked people, 70% say they'd like to choose their own work from home days. 76% though say they'd like to coordinate with co-workers when they come in. And this is one of the trickiest, hardest issues that firms are dealing with. This battle between choice and coordination. Since you can't both choose the day you want to come in and make sure you're always in with your co-workers. And I've written a bunch of about this in the media. It's not like I'm against choice. I'm an economist and I'm very in favor of choice. I think in this case, coordination is probably particularly valuable. And the reason is, if you ask people why you want to come into the office, the main reasons are face-to-face collaboration and socializing. So when you ask people, people mostly don't come in for the free bagel or the ping pong table or, the slightly faster computer. They basically come in to see their colleagues. And so because of this, if we look in the data in US firms, this is data for US firms. If you look at larger firms, certainly those with 25, particularly those with 250 employees, very few of them are letting employees fully decentralized choose. They're either saying, look, team by team, the groups that you work in, each team, you guys need to figure out and come up with some anchor days, the Europe team, the Australasia team, the South America, the engineering team, whatever, you're gonna have to choose days, or and that's like Google, for example, are doing that. Or as in the case of Apple or Asana, who I was in today, they are, having particular days. Asana said people are going to come in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, work from home Wednesday, Friday. Lazard's, I work with the bank. They say people are going to come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, work from home Monday, Friday. Or JPOW, the big research institute, have people come in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, work from home Thursday, Friday. Generally, if I was, giving advice, I normally suggest you want to work from home on a Friday to be sure. It's the most popular day, probably second Monday. So, to wrap up, in terms of management, generally the advice, at least in the short run, this thing is very hard, it's very complicated, at least in the short run, while we work things out and maybe come up with a better long run plan, is probably pick 2 or 3 days a week, I don't know, Tuesday, Thursday, promote that for all in-person events, have everyone come in, encourage them to come in on those days, encourage them to do quiet stuff on home days, maybe add an extra day a week for new hires, let's say Friday, but basically be deliberate and be organized. I then want to talk about implications of hybrid for the office. I mentioned that saving space was a big motivation for work from home. As of yet, there hasn't been a big benefit on this, but I'll explain why. So on the left is data from the US. On the right is data from the UK. In both cases, we asked 500 US firms, 3,000 UK firms, how much office space they're planning to cut pre to post COVID. Notice the US numbers are more negative. They've been hit by Brexit, which is a kind of additional negative. In either case, these are not very big numbers, given I've just told you we're going to from 5 to 30% of days at home. Remember, offices tend to be, ground zero for this. And offices, we're looking at about 50% of reduction in footfall post-pandemic. So set against that, 1 to 10% reductions in space is very small. So, people are always surprised. They're like, you'd think there's an enormous reduction in person days in the office, but we're not seeing much reduction in space. So what's going on? When I talk to companies, they raise 3 things. First, they say, look, in the long run, we're going to, work on this. In the short run, it's just really hard. Like Stanford, I've discussed with a lot of US, UK universities. I'm sure Melbourne's thinking about this. If you want people in on the same day, it's very hard to cut space. Like no one really wants to sublease an office on a Monday and a Friday. So scheduling's a big issue. Secondly is complexity. managers, every manager, CEO, senior exec, junior exec I talked to say, this is just so hard. It's so complicated. You suddenly got another dimension. It's just tough enough without having to deal with scheduling and trying to also figure out space. And then finally, there's an issue about density. It's not clear how long this will last, but there are certainly moves for continued social distancing. So we've been asking this top left question for a long time. I won't show you the time series, but actually it's pretty stable over time. We asked them post-pandemic, what would you do? Completely return, mostly return, partly return, or not return at all. Now, I'm probably personally in, I don't know, one of these two. Actually, I'm vaccinated and boosted. Actually, I had Omicron about 2 months ago. So right now I feel, I'm not that nervous about it, but I don't know quite where it end up. I'm certainly more nervous than pre-pandemic. But either way, what's important, there's a group of people who say they're not going to return at all. They're about 10%. There's then another partial return group. When you talk to companies, there's clearly 10 to 20% of people in most organizations that are pretty nervous about being as packed in together with co-workers and lifts and elevators, in kitchens and lobbyways. So it makes it really hard for companies to kind of push people back to the pre-pandemic density. Particularly think of lifts. You go up in the morning in high rises, the lift is jammed. People tend to come down in the evening and lunchtimes. That's a real issue. So that's one reason why space is not being cut. Longer run, I think it's going to look a lot more positive. So this is a graph of the percent of new patent applications. We do a text to data scraping each week. They're published by the US Patent and Trademark Office that mention remote work terms. Peter is going to talk more about this in a minute, remote work and a different topic, but we scrape these to see how many patents talk about work from home type things. About 0.5% did before the pandemic. It's now rising. I know from having talked to a lot of firms, this is a firm I'm talking to, Cadence. There are a lot of companies thinking about more complicated scheduling tools and things that I think eventually will enable us to reduce space. So a second fact is what I call the donut effect. I'm sure this is happening in Melbourne, Sydney, it's happening in London. I'm going to show you 2 US cities here. So what's happening is folks have been leaving city centers a bit, not massively. I mean, they're not deserted, but the density has dropped a bit in city centers because they're moving out to suburbs. And what you hear is folks saying, look, if I'm going to work from home 2-3 days a week, I don't really need to be so close in, but I would like a home office. I would like a bit of space, a backyard, a back garden. So I'm going to move out to the suburbs. So we see this very clearly. Folks are moving out. Question is, here's aggregate data for the US. We've seen for the US, about 10%, 5 to 10% of populations left the center of big cities. It's having an effect on rental and home values. So in American cities, the biggest increases in prices post-pandemic have been in the suburbs and exurbs, both for rental, home values. The question, I guess, is what are companies doing in response? Most companies I talk to are not moving their headquarters. So they're saying, look, we're going to go for hybrid, but if people are going to come in 2-3 days a week, we still want it to be somewhere central that's nice, that they come in, they work together. So generally, companies have not moved out to hub and spoke. It's not really happened. They basically kept their offices, just run them at lower density. What we do see is firms are changing the design of the offices. So, sticking with a TV theme on the left, this is Mad Men, that 1950s, 1960s, I think it's 1950s actually, show about American advertising, obviously very misogynistic, old fashioned. I mean, it's horribly outdated, but the offices also, I took some photos, are very much, very outdated in the sense there's lots of long cubicles. They look a lot, LSE, I know, a lot of the academic buildings in the UK actually look like that, lots of individual offices. Academia is slightly different, so maybe I shouldn't discuss that, but for the corporate world, for companies, a lot of them are moving more to stuff like this. They're saying, look, when people are in, they're in for 2-3 days of the week. We expect them to be in meetings, hanging out with each other, working in groups. We're not really aiming for them to be, hidden away in offices. We're going to have Zoom cubicles, to keep the noise down from people on Zoom calls, and then a bunch more, meeting rooms, open plan space. Finally, there is an impact on city centers in terms of retail. I think in some ways the biggest effect is on retail expenditure. So again, this is numbers for the US, but office workers in US city centers are like to come in only about 50% of the time they did pre-pandemic. These same office workers spent a huge amount of money around the office, food and drink, entertainment, shopping. That looks like it's going to drop a lot. And there's, a retail apocalypse in city centers. So finally, I mentioned, work from home. Another research topic I think is interesting. It's yet to happen now. I did an interview with the FT back in December. This is just a piece I saw recently. I mentioned this, they picked up on it. A lot of companies I'm hearing are thinking of offshoring and outsourcing a bit. So they're saying, that industrial team has been working fully remote or IT support or whatever it is for the last year and a half. They've been great. We're thinking it's maybe not, maybe they don't need to be in our firm, or maybe they don't need to be, in the US, in Australia, and, the UK. We're thinking of moving them abroad. So that hasn't happened yet. It's kind of hard to do this right now as the pandemic still kind of winding down. Travel is still quite tough. My guess is the next 5 years, much like China joining the World Trade Organization in 2001 led to a big increase in manufacturing trade. The pandemic, I think, will eventually lead to a big increase in service sector trade. So, rather than conclude, I'm just restating it. I think generally things are good. City centers will become a bit less crowded. The biggest worry, I have to say, is the big concern I have is on city centers, the public, tax side of it. So London, New York, San Francisco, a lot of people are moving out of city centers. They're paying less tax. The subway system is being used less. In some ways, my biggest fear is what happens to things like mass transit if they permanently have 30% less people using it. I mean, I really don't want these things going bankrupt. Then we get Carmageddon on the roads. And as David mentioned, I just finished on Tesla. So I don't know how many people saw it, but yesterday, Elon Musk sent out this tweet saying basically Tesla employees have to be in the office pretty much 40 hours a week. It's hard to know what that means, that 4 or 5 days a week. I think this is bad news for them. I think what's going to happen is, look, if you're working on high-end, exciting, cutting-edge engineering on Tesla cars, you'll probably come in. If you're working in Tesla finance, IT, HR, and most of those employees, when we asked the people what would they do, they're forced into the office 5 days a week. 10% say they'd about 7-8% quit on the spot. Another 30% say they'd look for another job. I think the prediction is folks doing kind of relatively standard jobs in Tesla are just going to say Google will pay me more and let me work from home 3 days a week, or Apple. So I'm thinking of moving ship. So I'll stop. We have a website, WFHresearch.com. And I've been actively putting stuff out on Twitter. I have to say I didn't use it until 6 months ago, but turns out it's very appropriate for putting out little research nuggets. And with this, I'll stop and I'll hand over to Peter.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Let me just share my screen. Okie dokie. And I maximize this. I guess it doesn't matter too much. Everyone can see my slides. Do I get a virtual thumbs up?
That's good.
Fantastic, thanks. So I'm going to be presenting a research paper which is joint with myself and Nick and 4 other researchers listed here. This is titled Remote Work Across Jobs, Cities and Countries. The motivation for